All right, so we're joined today by the very talented Kirk Hanson, who is a former Walt Disney Imagineer and animator for Disney Features and also Hanna-Barbera, serving as a storyboard artist, layout artist, character designer, just to name a few things. We're going to have a great conversation today about Kirk's incredible career, bringing some of the most well-known films to life and his involvement in some classic attractions at the Disney parks. So, Kirk, pleasure talking to you. Good to know you. Good to meet you. I know we're going to have a great conversation. How are you doing today, my friend?
Very good. Thanks, Mike.
And Kirk, so feel free to tell us about your career. I can't draw, so I can really appreciate animators. So tell me how you did it and your impressive career. So go for it.
As far as an impressive career, let me know when it starts. That would be fantastic. I was kind of a journeyman. I loved cartoons as a kid. I grew up with the HB stuff mostly in the 60s, and I still love that stuff. I still have a high regard for that stuff. And, with things like Johnny Quest being the be all end all. I became acquainted with the Disney animation. It was not nearly as prevalent because it wasn't on television all that much, except, but we would go see, I think the first feature I saw in the theaters was, I might have been 5, and that would have been Sword in the Stone. And then, of course, saw everything after that. And then some of this, I don't remember when the returnees would get to the theaters. I don't remember ever seeing Pinocchio or Snow White when I was little, or Fantasia or any of those, and Mary Poppins and Jungle Book and all those. And so you'd see those, and that was a big event when those would come around. But then you'd hope for animation on the weekly show, on the Wonderful World of Color, and sometimes you get it, sometimes you get some animation, but there were other things too that were just really fun. And so anyway, that stimulated my interest, and so I began drawing what I was seeing and drawing my own versions of them and everything. And probably from 5 years old on, I was really strong in art all the way through high school. And then I had a chance to go to CalArts, California Institute of the Arts, out here to the character animation program, which was not an original course, not an original major that they had. They had an animation department under the film video school. I was lucky enough that they created the character animation program about 5 years after the school opened, and it was run by all Disney luminaries. Jack Hanna, who directed all the Donald Duck shorts and some other things. He mostly worked in the shorts. He was the director of the program, and he was assisted by Bob McCrae, who was an animator at the studio. Faculty were all legends in their own right. We had Elmer Plummer, who was really an unsung hero. Nobody knows who Elmer is. And Elmer designed, my goodness, he designed Casey Jr., and he designed most of Dumbo. And he did design work on our favorite big ride-through attractions, Pirates and Mansion, and also assisted with the castle in Florida. He was part of the castle group. So working with Herbie, and then we had Ken O'Connor, who was a brilliant layout guy for 30 years at Disney. And then he taught caricature for us, and T was a director at Features. He directed the Dance of the Hours in Fantasia, the ones with the dancing hippos and the ostriches. And he also did a couple of sequences in Pinocchio with Jay Worthington, Foul Fellow, the heavy. And oh gosh, I'm forgetting somebody. Bill Moore, of course, who was not a Disney alumni, but he was faculty at Chouinard going all the way back into the 30s, and he was the color and design guy. In fact, Bill's course of color and design, I think, was probably the biggest change in animation when CalArts finally began to exert itself. I think Bill's course influenced more of us than any other thing. And they talk about the CalArts style. When people talk about the CalArts style, they don't know what they're talking about. We all wanted to draw like Mark Davis and animate like Milt Kahl. That was the CalArts style. Now they think it's it's all that late Cartoon Network stuff, what we call the bean mouths. That's a design, that's a design sensibility. So I graduated out of the did the character animation program, did the 4 years, got my degree, moved out into the work world. That was the year of one of the strikes. We had a writer's strike, so there was not a lot of work out there. Few people had left after their second year, and they went to Disney Features, and a lot of them, they were there for a long, long time. Mark Dendel and Mark Henn and Joe Ramps was there, and they really what it really was a farm system. They wanted to create talent and then bring it to the studio. That's essentially what was going on. Earlier people like John Musker, who directed with Ron Clements, they created and directed Little Mermaid, Aladdin. I just feel very fortunate that I had exposure to those guys who worked with Walt and were able to bring it to us. And so I felt like, that really made a good foundation. I was able to parlay it into 40 years worth, mostly at Disney. But after graduating, like I said, there wasn't a lot going on. And I had a feeling, I thought, I would like to go to the studio, but I also wanted to go to WED and work at WED in some capacity. And I thought maybe the model shop might be the best way to go. And I found out about an architectural modeling course, major actually, up at the Academy of Art in San Francisco. So I moved up there for 8 months, 9-10 months, something like that, for a couple of classes. I ended up working for the guy who was teaching the class. And so I learned kind of my way around a model making shop, and then came back to Southern California, and I ended up going to work for Gary Goddard Productions. And Gary Goddard was a Disney alum, and he with his partner Tony Christopher, their big claim to fame was mounting the Hoop-Dee-Doo review. That was them. I was in San Francisco for about 8 or 9 months, worked for Goddard for a little bit, and then I had an opportunity. It was only right that I go to Hanna-Barbera first, because I started about 11 HB. And Bill and Joe were still alive, and they were coming into the building every day. I was like, I got to work, it'd be like getting to work for Walt Disney, And the more I learned about them, the more impressed I became. And it was like, and they did all those Tom and Jerry's with MGM, and having to go out on their own once MGM closed their cartoon department. And so they had to start from scratch, and they decided to try television. Even though Jay Ward had done something before, he did Crusader Rabbit, which was 54, I think. And Jay wasn't in Hollywood. He was up in Berkeley, created Crusader Rabbit. It's essentially the template for Boeing. So, it just doesn't have as many drawings, but the plucky Crusaders, the plucky little leader, and then Rags the tiger was the dumb sidekick, and he's Bullwinkle. He's exactly Bullwinkle. So I got a chance to I was contacted by Don Hahn, who was like an associate producer on Basil, on Great Mouse Detective. And they needed a model for Ratigan's blimp. Fidget, the little bat, is like pedaling a bicycle in the back. It was a nod to the old Hyperion, because it had the hooked nose of the front, it had that shape. So I was asked if I could make a model of it for the animators to trace, like they did with Cruella's car. They built a little cardboard car with lines on them, to distinguish where the angle changes are on the shapes, like the top of the hood and then the sides, and then you'd run a little black stripe. And I think those had to be hand painted, but I wasn't cursed with having to do that. I was able to use that Zipatone tape that architects would use. So I did that. I built this little model, and then in '88, in April of '88, May of '88, I got to go work the model shop at WED, except now it was WDI. I wanted to work at WED. And I get a little miffed when I see that somebody in 1934 came to the Walt Disney Company. It was Walt Disney Studios, guys. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing with the resorts. If they had to hang resort on everything, it's like that's as unnecessary as screen doors on a submarine. I mean, you just don't need it. And so if I get my way, when I become king, I'm going to take everything back to Disneyland. It's not the Disneyland resort anymore. It's Disneyland. In fact, and then our other park, California Adventure, it becomes Disneyland California Adventure. And then the Walt Disney Resort becomes Walt Disney World again. And it becomes the Magic Kingdom again. This whole Magic Kingdom park thing is stupid.
Kirk is he will let you know how he feels, and that's why we have you here, Kirk. That's why we have you here.
Yeah, I could go in. We could either go into Disneyland or we could go into the Magic Kingdom, and I could.
Oh, we're going to. I want to hear your thoughts.
Worked in the model shop on Euro Disneyland. Worked on the big model, and I worked on the what's it called now? The Astro Orbiter, which is the rocket jets, which we eventually got at Disneyland. We got an exact duplicate of the rocket jets, except it wasn't on the platform like the way they left. They were smart enough to leave it at Walt Disney World up on the platform, but we got it down on the ground, making it a Dumbo. I was working at Deke when I did my last interview, and I got the job at WED, and it was on a Friday. I took a long lunch to take the interview. Okay, now I got to go in and give them my 2 weeks at the animation school, DIC. And I came back to the studio and nobody was there, and there were like tumbleweeds blowing in the hallways, and it was like, what happened? And I found out later everybody had just gotten fired on the show. That's when I started at WED. And then I worked on the big model and the Alice in Wonderland walkthrough. I worked on that, and I was learning all this stuff. And I was there long enough to realize that I didn't want to work in the model shop, because you work in that green foam. It's yellow, but they call it green foam. And you sand it, you cut it on you turn it on lathes and that stuff to make all the parts. Everything's made out of this yellow foam, and you have to wear the masks. Oh, and it gets in every pore and in your ears, up your nose. This is terrible. But I bet my one of my bestiest friends. Actually, I met him at Gary Goddard, but then he had moved on. He'd moved on to over to Imagineering. That's Bob Bernick. And Bob he very much took a leadership role in dimensional design, and was always being, people would want them on his project, and he built models and things for the thing, and he mostly worked for Tony Baxter. And so I was essentially working for Tony on this thing. This was the first thing I knew who Tony was. I had met him before in the 70s when I was working at the park, and I met him then. So that gig came to an end, and then I got a call they wanted somebody to do some visual development at Feature Animation for a film that development was doing. Development would bring people in to do visual stuff for unrealized projects. And so I worked on this project for I think it was Charlie Fink. He was running development then, and then there was an opportunity to go on to Aladdin, which was just getting on its feet. And they brought me in and they tried me out, and I was doing visual development on that. And as much as I liked it, it was like, you know what? I'd much rather be doing continuity and doing gags and that kind of thing. So they tried me out doing storyboards, or at Features, we just call it doing story. And I was working for John and Ron Clements, and they liked what I was doing. And so I stuck. And so I was there, and I was on every one of their 90s projects, from Aladdin to Hercules to Treasure Planet, which was at the end of the decade. And then I did stuff in between. Worked on Hunchback of Notre Dame, Fantasia, 2000, and a few other things. I was at Features probably for 13 years, and kind of ran out of things to do, or I couldn't get on a project. But they took me over TV animation. I worked on a thing. It was Mickey and the Three Musketeers. Three Musketeers things, which I actually did really well. It was a home video thing. We were working for the Disney TV. And so that was a lot of fun. And I got to work with a bunch of nuts on that one. Donovan Cook directed it, and I worked with Don Doherty and Ken Netroni. The great Bob Taylor, who started at Terry Toons like 40 years earlier. And Bob McKnight, he channels those 30s style character designs.
Sitting down to watch Aladdin or Hunchback of Notre Dame, you don't realize all the people involved in making that movie get to the big screen. And looking at those credits, and if you count the names, it's pretty impressive who was involved, and that goes to show how much it cost to make those movies. Because it's like, oh, it costs millions of dollars to do. Well, that's why it's everyone's involved, all the stuff, all the things needed. It's impressive.
And I'll be honest, I don't know which is more expensive, the old hand drawn way or the CG stuff. I don't think we'll ever see hand drawn animation.
I was going to ask you about hand drawn animation versus computer generated that we're seeing more with obviously Pixar and Disney animation.
And now we got AI on the horizon.
So what are your thoughts on that computer generated versus hand drawn? Is there a different perception as a viewer, as someone who watches the shows and the movies?
What Walt did, and for the way they made the movies for as long as they did, I mean, they're works of art. I mean, I can't even conceive of how many drawn animation drawings there are that have to be roughed out, cleaned up, in between, and then back in the 50s, right up till before the Xerox. Oh, like Sleeping Beauty and Peter Pan and Lady and the Tramp, and they're all hand inked, beautifully inked on the cells, and then they're painted. Could not conceive of doing that. I really couldn't. It's beyond me. Even though I knew that was the process. I'm Disneyland first, of course, is my home park. It's my favorite. But I appreciate the Magic Kingdom mostly because I think that was Disney's most creative period in theme parks. I think, to go from Disneyland to go and then to do Walt Disney World and to create a brand new park that's in keeping with Disneyland and does mimic it in a lot of ways. But if you'll notice, there's hardly anything duplicated, other than things like the interior of the Haunted Mansion and that kind of stuff. But the house is different, because it's in Liberty Square. All of Main Street is essentially different in terms of the architectural style. In fact, if you look at the Herb Ryman drawing of Disneyland, you'll see the Main Street train station from Walt Disney World, because it was based on a railroad station that was in Saratoga Springs. I remember seeing a woodcut illustration of the Main Street train station, except at Saratoga Springs. It's like, oh my God, that's where they got it from. And then Claude found a wonderful drawing that he found in some kind of book. In fact, I think the two mansions were in the same book. It was about Victorian architecture or architecture of the 19th century. And it's almost a church-like looking thing, but it's got the tower in the center and the two wings, going off the side. It's like, well, that's obviously where Claude got it, because Claude did the exterior in Florida, and it was Ken Anderson and Sam McKim here. Not the architects. The architects, I think it was Marvin Davis who was one of the architects here, but our mansion was based on a house called the Shipley Lydecker House, which was in Baltimore, and I think went away. I think it was built in 1853 or something. And it works because Baltimore was considered the South. It was south of Mason-Dixon lines. If you look at the early drawings, first Ken's drawing and then Sam's painting over it, it's got the square cupola, the square cupola, which was found on the Shipley Lydecker House.
Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World, a haunted mansion. Yeah, I've heard it was Harry Packer Mansion in Pennsylvania.
There we go again. I don't see it. I don't
see it either.
I've looked at the Henry. I think it's a wives' tale. And the Liberty Square Haunted Mansion is such a unique, such gothic looking thing. The Packer Mansion is not gothic. So, and it's purportedly it's supposed to be like up the Upper Hudson, like probably where Terrytown is or something. So I reject
the people at the Harry Pecker Mansion advertise it as, it inspired the Haunted Mansion. I'm sure that there may have been one person who looked at it and said, let's take this corner from here and bring it to, but I just don't see the big picture of it.
Walt sent everybody to go see The Haunting when it opened in '63. I mean, because Rowley and Yale Gracie and Ken Anderson, Ken was doing an early cartoony spook house environment, and it looks like where the Casper and the Ghostly Trio live. It's got all those kind of cliched things like the plasters falling down, you get the wood slats and everything like that, which are great. I mean, I love that. In fact, I just this last weekend, I was up and I finally visited the Winchester Mystery House. They claim that they inspired the Haunted Mansion as well. And it's like, okay, yeah. So let them. I don't particularly believe it. I think that movie, the Haunting, does it mostly. In fact, they even have the caretaker character in the mansion. I call him Dudley because he looks just like Dudley, the guy with the dog. It's the guy. He's got the cap and he's got the scarf around his neck and it also has the door. It has the bending door, the door that's bending out. The thing I like about Florida and those big dark rides in particular, they're pure and they don't have as many people poking at them. For some reason, Disneyland in the last 25 years became the sounding board for everything new, every kind of new. Like, I know they just put the Hatbox Ghost in Florida's mansion in the wrong place, by the way. Should be in the attic. Is the attic, was it Constance, what's her name, Hatchaway? Was that in the, with
the hatchet? Yeah. She's there. Yeah, Hatbox Ghost is in the hallway now.
He's right. He's right by the hallway, and it's like, folks, you can't have a fully realized apparition before Leota. Leota releases them, right? She's doing the incantation to release them. And then right after that, what do you get? You get the grand hall. You get the big party.
Right.
See, that's what story does. See?
Right. Story from the Haunted Mansion. Madame Leota releases the spirits, but for some reason, there's a ghost right in the beginning there. Yeah, it's a disconnect, but at the same time, our guests, especially guests coming to the park today, are a lot of them thinking that, realizing that? What do you think?
Depends on how much they're into it.
Yeah.
There's a whole online community. In fact, Haunted Mansion's bigger now online than Pirates is.
The Haunted Mansion is an amazing story, and people are learning about that now.
Yeah, but I think they put too much into it in terms of it's really just a tour of a haunted house. That's all it is. You're touring a haunted house, and there are interesting characters in each room, and you don't need a connecting. First of all, theme park attractions are not the way to tell intricate stories, and we've had generations of people coming to work at Disney who don't believe that, and they try to tell these intricate backstories of things. It's not needed, and so I'm more of the opinion that I like that they're just both Pirates and Mansion are just tours of places, and you don't need the connecting tissue of a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Back in the day when Walt Disney was, working on these attractions and making Disneyland, did the rides back then have backstories?
All the way, even up to Walt Disney World and beyond, they didn't have backstories. The first one that really had a backstory was Big Thunder, because there's a backstory about the guy Jason Chandler who discovered the vein of gold in Big Thunder. And he was eventually going to build a thing called Discovery Bay, which was going to be located, ironically enough, where Star Wars is now. The architecture of Main Street in Florida, it's much grander, it's much fancier. The City Hall, where's City Hall come from? Philadelphia City Hall. And it just the shape of the cupola, and then down, and then there's the clock and all that.
Some things you just never think about, and they this looks familiar, but I'm not putting it together. And now, well, thank you for that piece of information.
I remember things visually, and there are a few other things. There's a wonderful building in Frontierland that is the old Grass Valley, or no, is it Nevada City? One of those two cities towns are actually old gold rush towns here in California. Liberty Square, one of the things I'm really disappointed with is that they flattened out the Concord Bridge. Remember how Liberty Square had the Concord Bridge? It was a hump. Forever the parade went over it. I don't know what the big problem was, and then all of a sudden they couldn't. They had to make it flat. Is Liberty Square going to survive? I don't know.
Liberty Square is there currently, and then you have
The
this new
riverfront.
land. You have this. Well, no longer. Rivers of America is now gone.
But they'll take but there are going to be water features, aren't there? Oh, you're right. It won't be a riverfront anymore.
And the concept art does have a water feature, but that's not guaranteed. It's going to be opening in 5 years, so anything can happen. So how do you think that will impact Liberty Square, Frontierland? Now you have a Cars land. You're going to have Villains Land, which is going to be very impressive. I have no doubt about that.
I think Villains Land's a huge mistake to build a land based on.
So why do you think?
First of all, it's the number one. It's the number one online idea. The number one fan fiction idea.
It was
So I'm always like, we'll go the other way then. If it's being advocated out in public like that, go the other way. It can't be any good. Number one. Number two, you can't take all the villains out of all the other stories. How can the villains all have a land all to themselves? So that means the good guys have to have a land all themselves. And now you're not going to get the two opposing dynamics.
That's an interesting point. But the reason why that could happen is because in MGM Studios, they have Star Tours outside of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. How does that happen?
Well, listen, we got Star Tours here at Disneyland, and then we have Galaxy's Edge apart from it. Yeah, I think it's got to be. Because it's like one thing opened, and then they don't care about that because they're intent on the new thing that they're creating. And see, the thing I really don't like about Star Wars, there's many. But every major idea that's presented in Disneyland and to a degree the Magic Kingdom are on the hub. You enter them from the hub. There's a bridge that takes you over, takes you to Adventureland, or it takes you to Liberty Square. And Liberty Square is just a detail of Frontierland.
Mickey's Birthday Land, which was kind of like, a piece of Fantasyland in a way, but it was kind of on the outskirts.
Just facets. They're facets of the bigger idea.
So with villains, I see your points. When you have the Magic Kingdom, you have the themed lands. Is it going to be called Villains Land?
It's going to be its own thing. It's going to be. I don't think.
Or is it going to be part of Fantasyland? I don't think it's going to be part of.
I don't think so. When Walt was conceiving Disneyland, he had these points on the compass. These cardinal points, and then he would choose a name that would cover up vast array of ideas, all centered to what a fantasy land is. Or a Tomorrowland. It's not specific to any one thing. And so it's a great umbrella. So losing that's disappointing too.
It's good to hear a former Imagineer's insights.
I'm kind of a blowhard, I know, but it's my reputation.
That's what we need. Honesty and transparency. And, like I said, people that love the new stuff, the people that are not a fan of the new stuff. And I think it's good to have that balance of, perspective.
They knew what they were doing in terms of setting up the anticipation, the way you drive in and drive all the way up to that big parking lot, and then you cross the parking lot to go to the TTC, and then there across that lagoon is that park and that castle, and if you're lucky enough to go at twilight or dusk, and the lights come on and you're on the steamboat going across, or if you're on the monorail, that is ingenious. And the fact there's nothing like it. And I don't care how many epic universes they put in, or, none of that would exist without Walt Disney World being there. At Walt Disney World in fact, I am convinced that Walt Disney coined a term theme park. Because I can't find it prior to the new theme park in Florida. They had to come up with a term to describe that they were going to do another Disneyland style park, but they got out of saying Disneyland style park, in the movie and in the written material as well. And so theme park, I was looking at books about amusement parks, way before Walt Disney World. You know, they're written in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and I can't find theme park in any of them. And it was only because of Disneyland and then Walt Disney World. Disney used the term, they said amusement theme park or theme amusement park. And then it got truncated even more and became theme park, and it became the descriptor. So another Disney thing.
I think overall, there are these attractions that are special to you, special to me, and special to many others. Kirk, this is a great conversation. Your stories and your experiences, and happy to have you back again for another conversation. Thanks again, Kirk. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk soon.